Hello, Thunder Wizards. Okay, so in lieu of live question and answers, as you may or may not know, I was once again banned by YouTube for 90 days because I put a video clip something like 7 or 8 years ago, and they didn't like it, and they complained to YouTube, and YouTube said, okay, no live streaming for 90 days. It's really quite annoying. So we're going to be talking about how the the Devas. What did I say on here? How, sorry, how the Asuras became the Devas. We're going to be talking about how the Asuras became the Devas. We're going to be talking about what critical thinking is. It's so important because somebody gave a definition of critical thinking that showed his lack of critical thinking and his lack of understanding of critical thinking. It's not his fault. This is a common misunderstanding. And maybe we'll get to some other questions. So if you put questions, valuable questions, on the videos, I will address them just like I would in a live question and answer. So before I go any further, please subscribe, hit the bell button so you know when I've uploaded a video. These links are up here for a reason. I had somebody commented and asked me, how much for a consultation. If you go to this link here, courses.thunderwizard.com, you will find everything that is available to you, including my books, my DVDs, my online streaming video courses, and consultations, Vedic astrology readings, rune readings, certifications. Listen, guys, if you want to make progress in my path, it means you are going to have to pay attention, and you're going to have to put some effort into things. Clicking on a link and following the links to look for what you're looking for is a way that shows me that you can think things through and take action. So go there to see everything that we have. neo.thunderwizard.com, we'll talk about that later, but that is, in my estimation, the best way to take advantage of not only how to understand my course, but also my courses, my channel, but also how to get the most out of life. So let's get right into the teaching. So how did the Asuras become the Devas? And this started off with a question, and unfortunately I think he deleted a lot of his questions, which is too bad. Look, if you put a question on a YouTube comment section that everybody in the world can see, I'm assuming that you are open to having me talk about it publicly. Okay? So he first, and I won't say the guy's name because I don't remember it offhand, but I won't anyway. He said, first off, he wanted to know, did I think that Norse people were of Asura blood? Like, were they descended from the Asuras? And he went on to surmise that because of the red tint in, he didn't say it, but white people's skin, the red tint in white people's skin, that would be like the Asuras, who were very into blood and very warlike, and were Norse people, descended from the Asuras. So I responded and I said that I didn't think that skin color meant anything. And then I went on to explain to him who the Asuras were, because he was making the connection between the words Asura and Aesir. So he was partly right, although I don't think he really had any information behind it. He was making some suppositions based on sound similarity, and he was partly right. See, here's the thing: you've got to know what really is behind the etymology of words, the origin of words, in order to know where they come from and what they mean. So he was partly right. The word Asura in the Vedic and the word Aesir in the Norse do come from the same root word. Although Aesir, even though it sounds like Asura, there's actually some difference. The R at the end is something that the Norse language does The word, if we were really to translate it into English, it wouldn't be Aesir, it would be os or es. So that root of os, the Anglo-Saxons, the Norse people tend to make ah sounds and turn them into o sounds. So the os or the as comes from the same root as asura. And as it turns out, my friend did stumble on the right understanding that the Aesir, which means the celestial deities, Thor, Odin, Tiw, these are representatives of the celestial deities, the Os. The Asuras in Vedic times, we're talking thousands of years ago, like, probably 3,000-4,000 years ago, when it was just the Vedic religion, before it evolved into the Hindu religion that we know of today. The gods were called the Asuras. Now, this term Asura didn't just mean celestial deity, it meant deity in general. So it could have been what we in the Norse polytheist religion would call the Vanir. So I tried to explain to this gentleman that first and foremost, skin color means nothing. Human beings can't be descended from the Aesir because they're a different class of being altogether. So, I tried to, he was going off on that. And look, human beings are human beings. We are descended from Manu or Manuj, which is the first human. His name, where we get the word man in mankind and in man, it means the mind, and it also simultaneously means the moon. That is why in Vedic astrology, the moon represents the mind and the emotions. The difference between the mind and the intellect is that the intellect is what we use to figure things out. Most Westerners confuse the mind with the intellect. The mind is not the intellect. The mind is the reflective power that makes humans different from other animals. Animals cannot meditate. They cannot reflect upon the spirit, which is why Manuj was the first being who was able to do that. Now, Manuj is the son of Tiw and Mother Earth. So here we have the combination of celestial deity and the earth realm, and it comes together. And in order for us to be able to be both, to live in both realms, we need this thing called the mind. The mind does exactly what the moon does. The moon reflects the light of the sun. The sun is the soul of our solar system. That's why it sounds the same. Soul and solar. It's because these are interchangeable words. Mind and moon were interchangeable words to our Indo-European ancestors. Soul and soul were interchangeable words. And the soul is the sun of the body. It is the source of life in the body, just like the source of life on earth is the sun. So Man meant all human beings, both male and female. It's only later that the word was corrupted to mean just men, meaning males. The original word for male and female in the Germanic language was wer and wif. So wer is where we get the word werewolf. It means man-wolf. So if you're actually watching a werewolf movie and it's a female werewolf, it wouldn't be a werewolf, it would be a weef wolf. Because weef, where we get the word wife, means woman. And so when people get married, husband and wife, what you get is woman, wife, and housebound. Husband doesn't mean man, it means you're bound to a house. That comes from the ancient tribal tradition of the young men, when they get to be of fighting age, they were just automatically became part of the military, of these tribal units, and they would go and they would patrol their territory. And you have to understand that what is now Germany today, Germania, was a jungle. It was full of swamps, and it was full of forests, and it was full of bears and boars, and it was just a really wild place. That's one of the reasons why the Romans couldn't conquer it, is because in order to get their military machine through there, they would have to go through all of these swamps, and just it was like going into the Amazon, except instead of those kinds of trees, you had a lot of pine trees and a lot of birch trees and a lot of other things like that. So it was like the Amazon. And so what the young men would have to do is that they would automatically become part of the military, and they would go around and they would patrol their borders until they got to the age of being able to marry, in which case, when they married, they were now bound to a house. So they could no longer travel around and protect their borders. So they became house bound. So it meant a property owner. So it means property owner and his woman. Husband und Wife, husband and wife. So here are some of the words you need to understand. So we're getting back to how did the Asura become the Devis? So the word Asura originally meant power. And it really means divine power, but it was sometimes applied to human beings, like if a king was really powerful, and we're talking way back like in the Hittite areas and times and things like that, he might have been called an Asura, which meant he was extremely powerful. Maybe they thought that he had divine powers to him. So the Asuras were the powers, the gods, and it represented both what we consider to be the Aesir and the Vanir. Aesir are celestial gods. The Vanir are the powers of the earth, powers of fertility, powers of magic. And so the reason why there is a war between the Aesir and the Vanir, the celestial deities and the terrestrial deities, is that it represents a balance. The celestial deities live just like the stars do. They live in timeless perfection. They're very black and white in their thinking. That's why when we worship the celestial gods, we become overwhelmed with zeal and with spiritual and religious fervor. This is because of the essence of the Aesir, the celestial deities. They live in timeless perfection, and they do not like the corruption that happens through time, death, old age, change. They don't like that. They like to live in their timeless perfection. That's why they live in a fortress. They live in one of the 9 worlds called Asgard, Os Yard, the protective fortress of the celestial deities, because there they can maintain their timeless perfection. They don't like that the powers of the earth live in time. They don't like that. They don't like things like this is why when people get super religious, they become judgmental against sexuality and magic and things like that, because these represent things that happen within time and space, in space-time. So there is this battle, just like there is a battle between things change when you go at the subatomic level. All of the rules of physics change. That's where the Aesir live. When you go to macro, levels where time and space interact, that's a completely different physics. So they're at odds with each other. But in order for us to live in this 3-dimensional space-time, we need that balance. So that war is really a balance. It's a seeking of balance. That's why in the Norse tradition, there is this exchange of, that some of the Vanir go to live with the Aesir and vice versa. That's where all that comes from. So the Asuras in the Vedic tradition, over time, when they represented the powers, then became to represent what is falsely translated as demons. And they represent earthly powers. Now, what happened is that the Hindu tradition has moved more towards the celestial deities. So they favor the celestial deities, which is why they don't worship the Asuras. And the Asuras are seen as destructive. But they're not destructive because in order for there to be, lust, in order for there to be greed, in order for there to be, the attachment, basically, these are seen as negative in the Hindu tradition because they're moving more towards moksha, liberation towards the spiritual. So you see this difference between the two. And what ended up happening is that the word asura, which meant power, like in the original understanding of Indra was an asura. Indra is seen as the conquering king, where he goes in and he conquers things. And so over time, he started to get this reputation as being lustful for power. And so that's when he sort of started to change to become a demigod. And so even though now he's not seen as an asura, that's why an asura meant somebody powerful who went after power, and now in the Hindu tradition this is not what they focus on. So they changed the word to Deva. So Deva means divine, and it really does it is a very good word for the celestial deities, because the word for the king of the universe who lives in the North Star, his name is Tiu. Tiu is the same root word for divine, Diu. It's the word for Jupiter, Diupiter. So Diupiter is the king of the heavens. Tiu in the Germanic version was originally the king of the heavens, and he was replaced by Odin. That's a whole other thing. We won't get into that. And so what ended up happening is that the word Asura stopped meaning divine power and started only focusing on those entities, those deities that sought power, attachment in space and time. And because of the Hindu focus on moksha or liberation, it sort of has a taint to it. If you talk to a Hindu, they'll say, Asuras aren't really demons. We need them. It's just they are attached to the physical realm, and so they work against your spiritual awareness. Now, that's kind of an assumption, but that's how they color it, and that's why they only worship the Devas and not the Asuras. In the Norse tradition, we're looking at an older understanding. In fact, I would say even older than the Vedic understanding. And it was about a dynamic balance between the celestial deities who represented timeless perfection and the deities of magic, the deities of wisdom, the deities of sex and procreation and money and all these kinds of things. So there's more of an understanding in the ancient Indo-European tradition of this balance. Now, this gentleman who wanted to ask all these questions, first let me just say, he's taken he didn't have to, because I don't have anything against him, but he took his comments off, partly because he did something that annoys me. Again, he didn't mean to, but it annoys me, number one, when people don't watch the videos. Like if you go and you comment on one of my videos and you haven't watched and you haven't listened, and you say something, you misquote what I said or only take half of what I said, or you go in and you respond to correct me on something which I end up talking about later that annoys me. It means that you're not paying attention. It means that you don't have any discipline and you don't have any patience. I kind of understand because I got some of those things too, but that annoys me. But then what will happen is I will go in, if I respond to your comment, I will correct and I will fill in the blanks. If you still want to double down and prove your point and not read what I wrote, that annoys me. So this gentleman did that, and I kind of said, "Listen, you're gonna offend me if you don't put the effort in to read what I'm writing here." So I think he did that, and he took his things off. But in order to understand why the Aesir and the Asuras aren't the same thing, you have to understand what the root of the words are, and this is what I've been trying to explain. So Aesir did come from the root Asura, which meant power, divine power. And the Asuras were the name for all of the deities in the ancient Vedic tradition, both celestial and terrestrial. And then what ended up happening is the shift to the Hindu tradition to focus on the celestial deities, and so they solely became called the Devas. And the word Asura then was left for the terrestrial deities of magic and procreation and things like that. And so that's why that's there. But there was another question by somebody else who said, the other thing is that I believe, the same individual, and it's sad because I can't quote him accurately because he took his question off, but he went off to say that Odin and Shukra were the same deity. And he did that because he saw that there were some similarities in the myth, and that Odin, hung on a tree, Shukra hung on, I don't know what, a tree or something. That Odin lost an eye and Shukra lost an eye. And so because of those, he assumed that they're talking about the same being. But absolutely we are not. Odin, number one, is one of the Aesir, one of the celestial deities. Shukra is one of the Vanir. So, and as we know, Shukra Karya is the teacher of the Asuras. He is the teacher of the earthly deities of magic and procreation and things like that. Now, Odin and even though there's those similarities in the mythology, that's where the similarity ends. And what ends up happening is that he goes on to say that because of this, Odin is Shukra. And so I went on to explain to him that no, Shukra is the planet Venus. And Odin has a connection to the planet Mercury. So right there, they're not the same. Odin is not the teacher of the Vanir. So in order for Odin to be Shukra, it would mean that he was the teacher of the Vanir. He's not the teacher of the Vanir. He's not the teacher of anybody. He is now seen as the divine master. And so now getting back to the earlier thing, Odin took over the role of the divine king of the heavens. And he took it from Tiu. Now, and I'm going to give you the background on why that happened. Tiu is actually in mortal combat with the entity known as the wolf. What is his name? You know who I'm talking about. The giant wolf. One of the offspring of Loki. And anyway, Odin cannot be the teacher of the Vanir because the Vanir are a completely different class of being. The word Shukra is the word for the planet Venus, as well as the word for the teacher of the terrestrial deities, the deities of magic and procreation, the Asuras. The teacher of the Asuras is Venus. The word Venus, the way we pronounce it is actually completely mispronounced, because in the Latin, the word Venus was pronounced Venus. The US is just an ending that is used in Latin to denote the nominative case. I won't get into that. So you really don't even need to pronounce that. You take that off and the word Venus is actually pronounced Wayne. In Anglo-Saxon, the term for the Vanir is the Waynes. Wayne, it's the exact same word. Venus represents the Vanir. So Odin can't be the teacher of the Vanir because he's not the teacher of the Vanir. He is not the planet Venus. He is connected to the planet Mercury, and he is the king of the heavens. He took that over from Tiu, who is in mortal combat with the wolf Fenris. Thank you. God, my memory. Holy crap. Fenris, the giant wolf who is the son of Loki, who is seeking to devour the universe. Now, I got contacted by one guy who wanted to become Fenris, and he thought that Fenris was a really powerful being and that he's not evil, that he represents. And so I had to correct him a little bit, and I said, Fenris is not what you think it is. Fenris is a very destructive force. And yes, it's a necessary force. It's a part of reality. But Fenris, if left unbound, would swallow the entire universe. He represents all of the base instincts of the basest of the instincts of the human being, which is to consume and to destroy. This is part of our reptilian brainstem, where we seek to kill, destroy, copulate, or eat, or run away from. This is where it comes from, and it's the deepest part of that. We need that because without that, there would be, we wouldn't live. We would just sit and meditate, and we would starve to death. We need Fenris in order to survive. But if Fenris is left unchecked, he destroys you. So people who die from drug addiction, who die from violence, people who are in prison, who serial killers, people who just can't refrain from their most violent, most oppressive, most consumptive. This is Fenris. These are people who are ruled by Fenris, and it destroys them. So, I don't recommend that people worship Fenris and want to become Fenris because they think he's this cute wolf. The wolf symbol in the tribal Germanic understanding was not the same as the wolf that we see in, say, Native American tradition. Now, I've got nothing against wolves. I think wolves are, I've got a strong connection to wolves. But you have to understand the symbolism in each society. The wolves in Northern Europe were quite destructive. They were beings that, if you were a farmer, wolves would just, and they still to this day, they'll decimate your cows, your sheep. They'll come in and just decimate whatever livestock you have. So the tribal Germanic people who were also farmers, as well as hunter-gatherers, they saw the wolf as representing the worst in humans. And so you have to understand, just like with the Hindu Vedic tradition, they have a slight twist, which we might say is a slight warping towards the celestial deities. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have value, because the Hindu tradition is an extremely powerful shamanic tradition which focuses on high levels of spiritual awareness. And so they have moved away from what we would call the Vanir. And so for the tribal Germanic people, in order for them to have their life, they had to make sure that wolves were kept to a minimum, because wolves would just decimate. Remember that the tribal Germanic people didn't live in what we now look upon as Germany. Germany today is not what it was then. It was a jungle. It was a wilderness. It was a swamp with thick forests and wild animals, and there were giant. The progenitors of today's cattle were actually large, enormous bison that stood 7 feet, and had huge horns and were incredibly fierce. And there were bears and there were wolves and all of that. So it was a dangerous place to be. So the wolf was something you had to keep at bay. So that means when you read wolf in Germanic mythology, it's going to represent a destructive aspect. So Fenris is the ultimate of that. So you don't want to worship Fenris. It's not some cute, it's not like Native American, a worship of the wolf animal. It's not like that. It's a completely different understanding. Fenris is not a wolf. The symbol of Fenris is a wolf, similar to a wolf devouring its prey. Now, whenever a wolf would be devouring, say, a cow or a sheep, it would mean that the human being who owned that animal was going to lose. It might be, he might only have 3 or 4 or 2 animals. And if a wolf comes in, he might kill his entire, stock of animals. And so that would be the same as somebody coming in and, destroying your car and ransacking your house. All of the things that are of value to you would be gone. So that's how they saw wolves back then. Fenris is the ultimate wolf. He wants to consume the entire universe. So we can appreciate him, but I definitely don't recommend worshiping him. So this guy had a misunderstanding. So I get annoyed at misunderstandings, and I get annoyed at people who, and this is my failing, but I get annoyed at people who double down and want to hold on to their misunderstandings, which now takes me into the next question we're going to answer. And this, I believe the comments are still here. So there's a gentleman who responded to one of my videos about Christianity. And I'll read some of the things he says. He says, I won't try and read everything, but the reason why I'm pointing this out is because this gentleman's comments actually reflect a lack of critical thinking. And if you're the person who made this comment, I'm not attacking you. I'm just using you to understand what critical thinking is seeking to correct. So before we go any further, let me tell you what critical thinking is. Critical thinking is the ability to make accurate assessments about a belief or something, an idea. That's the whole point. The whole point is to be able to look at something and be able to objectively analyze whether or not the theory or the belief or whatever somebody is saying actually has whole credibility to it. That's the whole point of critical thinking. And there are plenty of people out there who believe themselves to be critical thinkers who are not critical thinkers. There are people out there who use the idea of critical thinking to support things like agnosticism and atheism, which I have nothing against, except that people who keep throwing that word out lots of times are not critical in their thinking at all. So how is it that you get to the place where you're able to look at an idea or a theory or a statement and analyze it and analyze how true or untrue it is? Here's how you do it. The first thing you do is you start off with the understanding that every human being, including yourself, has an emotional agenda. So anybody who says, I don't have an emotional agenda, it doesn't understand themselves. The best that anybody can say is, if I have an emotional agenda about this, I'm not aware of it. The way you know that somebody does have an emotional agenda is when you point out to them that and they get very defensive, like overly defensive. Methinks thou dost protest too much. For instance, I've used this before. There used to be the phrase latent homosexuality. We don't use that anymore. But what it meant was somebody who was unconsciously homosexual, somebody who was in denial. And so if you've got an emotional attachment on an unconscious level, meaning you're not aware of it, that's incredibly important. If you have something on the unconscious level going on, an attachment, you're not aware of it. So if you were to say to somebody, you strike me as like you might be a latent homosexual, the best thing that somebody can say is, if that's true, I'm not aware of it. And if somebody can say that without any emotional, attachment to it, that is an indication that they probably aren't. Because if somebody says, well, I mean, I got nothing against it if that's what people like. I honestly don't feel that way. And, I'm trying to, I don't feel that. So if that's true, I'm not aware of it. That would be the sign of somebody who doesn't have an emotional attachment, and is because they don't care. They don't have an attachment one way or another. They're okay if they are. They're okay if they're not. They honestly don't feel like they are. That's a sign of somebody who doesn't have an emotional attachment, an unconscious emotional agenda. If you say to somebody, the people who talk like that are usually latent homosexuals. If the person gets furious and starts going on and on about, how dare you say that about me? I am such a man. I do this and I do that, and I'm a man and I watch football, and I can't believe you would say that to me. That's the sign that there is an unconscious attachment, and the defensiveness is part of their denial. Now, on a conscious level, they may mean what they say. They may mean, they may consciously think that they're not. But remember, it's unconscious. They're not aware of it. So the first thing about critical thinking is that there is an understanding that everybody, including you, have emotional unconscious agendas. First thing. This is what this individual doesn't understand, because he goes on to say this. He says, the issue with critical thinking is that it limits your potential. So many assumptions there. So let's move on to the next aspect of critical thinking, which is that, number one, everybody has an emotional agenda, including you. Number two, everything is based on assumptions. And when people are talking and wanting to convince you of their belief or their point of view, they will introduce assumptions. Now, if they don't understand that they're assumptions, then they will present them as facts. When you want to challenge them on their facts, they get very defensive. This means there's an emotional agenda. So the first thing we need to know is that assumptions are the basis of all beliefs. Everything, including, not jumping off of cliffs. Not, stepping into waters filled with crocodiles. If you have an assumption that crocodiles are dangerous and they might eat you, and you know that there are crocodiles in that river, then the assumption is crocodiles are dangerous, they might eat me. You're going to not step in the river. But if you have an inaccurate assumption and you think that crocodiles are furry and want to cuddle with you and will be your best friend, and you go, I'm going to jump in that crocodile-laden river, that assumption may get you killed because your assumption is wrong. Crocodiles are not friendly little furry creatures. So, he lays an assumption here. The issue with critical thinking is that it limits your potential. That's an assumption. So to understand that, first, in order for me to accept it, I would have to accept that assumption. So I didn't. As soon as I read that, I knew, okay, that's an assumption. I don't accept that assumption. That told me that his critical thinking was actually not so good. He goes on to say, there's something to be said for the imagination and its contributions to the individual and society. So the other thing about people who have emotional agendas, they tend to over-intellectualize things. This is highly over-intellectualized. He's dumping assumptions right and left that have nothing to do with critical thinking. So here he's making it goes on, but he's making the connection that imagination is antithetical to critical thinking. And that's a false assumption, because that's just not true. We'll go on. I'll go on. He says, faith, I'm assuming he means like spiritual faith. Faith runs somewhat parallel to the imagination in the sense you are believing in something you cannot see. None of that is true. Again, more assumptions that are just false. The imagination is not faith. The imagination is exactly what it sounds like. You use your mind to imagine a scenario. That scenario could be, I'm imagining getting in my car and driving to the store. That is not parallel to faith. It is just, I'm imagining that act. Imagination of superheroes and Superman. You need to have an imagination to imagine a man who can fly, who's from another planet, who gets his power from the sun. That's the imagination. That's not faith. You can read comic books and really allow your imagination to go deep into Superman without choosing to believe that Superman exists. Faith is an intellectual decision to believe in something. This is why Christians are constantly talking about faith. And this is why when you talk to them, or if you listen to them, they will talk that faith is above reason. Because the reality is that even if you use the slightest bit of just common sense reason, the Christian religion starts to fall apart. The world being created in 7 days, Noah and the flood, Moses parting the Red Seas, all this stuff, there's just none of that could have happened according to the laws of science. So you have to choose to believe. A human being who was delivered by virgin birth, that everything written in the Bible is literal and true. So that's why they talk about their faith, and that's why they talk about faith versus, secular society, because secular society wants to know the truth. They want to look at, how did the world form and what are stars, and let's look at that and let's do experiments and let's do things like carbon dating and look at the facts we don't know. Let's figure it out. Faith says, no, here's an assumption I was told, and I choose to believe that over anything else. So imagination is not faith. That is a false assumption. So this is what people do. When they want to make an argument, they start by, including me, they start by laying assumptions. And if you're not listening to the assumptions and you just let them go in there, then you become stuck in their wheelhouse. And then they can toss you around with their beliefs because you've now accepted that critical thinking limits your potential, number one, that critical thinking and faith are somewhat parallel to each other, which is either they're parallel or they're not. What is this somewhat? And that that if you choose to become a critical thinker, that somehow you are destroying imagination, which is just not true. You can be a critical thinker and love reading mythology. You can be a critical thinker and love the idea of a dynamic universe full of energy that, we don't understand it, but I really love thinking about it and, experiencing it, right? You can still be a critical thinker and use your imagination. So faith runs somewhat parallel to the imagination in the sense you're believing in something you cannot see, which is just, imagination is not believing in something you cannot see. It's just simply imagining the possibility. Faith is choosing to believe it. It's an intellectual choice. The intellect is actually the enemy of imagination. So this is where he's coming from. I'm going to give you my assumption about him. I can't prove it. I don't know if it's true. I may have an emotional attachment to it. I could be wrong. So I am now acknowledging the first rule of critical thinking, which is that I acknowledge that I have unconscious emotional agendas that may skew my ability to see the truth. So I'm acknowledging that to you. When somebody acknowledges their emotional attachment, when they acknowledge to you their emotional agenda, it shows that they have an understanding they might be wrong. Those are people you want to listen to. You don't want to listen to people who throw things out as facts, who throw assumptions out as facts and are unwilling to examine, why do I have that assumption? Those are people you don't want to listen to. You do want to listen to people who have an ability to go, you may be right. That's how I believe it, but I could be skewed by my emotional attachment here. Everybody has an emotional attachment. Everybody. It's just whether or not you have the consciousness to see whether or not you do. All right, so he says we should be encouraging reverie. The imagination is good. So again, see, he's made a conclusion. He introduced an assumption that critical thinking is against imagination. Imagination is good. We should allow people to have an imagination. Here's what I think is going on. My assumption about this individual is that he feels that he has been attacked. He has been criticized for his artistic, imaginative mind. And so as a result, he projects himself onto people who he believes has been attacked by critical thinking. So he himself may or may not be a person of faith, I don't know. But he emotionally feels attached to those people and he wants to protect them. So this isn't about critical thinking. This is why this is not somebody who's using critical thinking at the moment. This is about his emotional experience of not wanting to be attacked. He wants to be accepted. He wants his ideas to be accepted. He wants his imagination, his artistic ability. I don't know. Was he a musician and his parents told him that was stupid? Was he an artist? Was he, somebody who, was he an actor? Was he a poet? And his parents said, don't do that. There's nothing practical in that. The imagination is worthless. And he jumbled the two. So he's assuming that people who are critical thinkers are against the imagination. So I'm not. I teach critical thinking, and I am somebody who worships the gods. I am somebody who teaches about mythology. I'm somebody who teaches about Qigong and energy work. I attack Christianity because of all of the false assumptions and all of the lack of critical thinking that's involved in it. But I don't attack any religion or any belief or any practice that allows for other beliefs. So, you could believe in aliens, and even though I personally, may not feel an attachment to that belief, and I may have some judgments about the emotional makeup of people who are into aliens, I can honestly say that I don't care one way or another. I have no emotional agenda whether aliens do or don't exist. I can't disprove it, but I personally, I don't have a strong connection to, spirituality based on aliens. It's just who I am. I'm just being honest. I'm using critical thinking to say to myself, I can't disprove it. I don't really, I'm not really thrilled about it, but I can't disprove it. So see what I mean? See the difference? Anyway, so I went on to say that critical thinking limits your potential. Hilarious. Oh, you're serious. I don't think you understand what critical thinking means and how it's used. And I said to him, you're obviously new to the channel and you haven't watched a lot of my videos because I talk about critical thinking all the time. And then I said, please do me a favor, watch more of my vids before making before coming to any conclusions and making any comments and those kinds of things. So that's usually what I do. I'll usually address somebody's inaccurate statement or what I don't agree with, and especially if they don't have enough information, and if they haven't listened to me and know what I teach, and they're just jumping off. This is the first video they've seen, and they can't help themselves, and they have to say something. Then I have to address their limited understanding of both me and the subject matter, and then I say, watch more of my videos. Now, when they come back and they double down and repeat their lack of understanding, then I start to get annoyed. So he says, let's see here. I'm not gonna get into this because he just keeps doubling down. So here we've got a lack of critical thinking because he has an emotional agenda. Here, once again, I'm one of those people that's discounting him. So his whole reason for fighting against critical thinking was he felt personally attacked. He doesn't see this. He thinks he's making reason, but he's coming from an emotional agenda. And his emotional agenda is skewing his ability to understand what critical thinking is. And he's doing the same thing with me. I address it, I explain it, and I accept him, and I say, do more research on me so you know what I'm talking about. And he just keeps doubling down. He's operating from an emotional agenda. he goes on to say this. I'll go to his last one. He says, this is again after 3 or 4 comments. He says, critical thinking means making reasoned judgments that are logical and well thought out. That is not accurate. That is not critical thinking. Because if you make an assumption and both parties accept that assumption, whether it's true or not, you can make all kinds of reasoned judgments and logical arguments and well thought out. You can do that forever. This is what the intellect does. But it doesn't mean that you started from an accurate assumption. So critical thinking does not mean making reasoned judgments or logical arguments. Critical thinking means that you have the ability to examine people's assumptions that they introduce and look at your own emotional reaction to it, and be able to go, wow, I have a strong emotional reaction to that. Let's put that aside and listen to what this person says. Now, there are some rules when it comes to analyzing what somebody says. So if you want to be able to listen to an assumption and be able to prepare yourself to understand it, there are some rules about critical thinking. Again, this person doesn't know this. I can tell by reading it. Critical thinking, then, once you understand that you have an unconscious emotional agendas, that the person giving you this information also has emotional agendas, and that one or both of you could be skewed by your emotional attachment to the outcome. Then you ask questions. You take your own personal emotional attachment and you put it aside. And you go, I'm having a strong feeling about this, but let me put that aside for a moment. You ask these questions. When is something true or false? So I looked at a couple of them here. He introduces the assumption, critical thinking limits your potential. That's an assumption that he states as fact. Number one, that's just purely false. On its head, it's false. The next question, when is something sometimes true and sometimes false? You make the statement that the sun shines in the sky. That is not entirely true because at least half the time in part of the world, depending on what time of year and blah, 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 half of the time the sky is dark. So that statement is both true and false at the same time. When is something sometimes true and sometimes false? The sun shines in the sky. That's only true part of the time. There's another question. When is something partially true and partially false? Dogs are vicious and should not be touched by humans. That's partially true and partially false. That's actually sometimes true and sometimes false. See what I mean? Those are the kinds of questions you look at, because when people want to introduce beliefs that are coming from an emotional agenda, they will do what this person is doing. They will make blanket, generalized, dualistic statements that you either have to accept or reject. And what the person who is not using critical thinking does is they will introduce a belief that has some truth to it, and they're manipulating it so if you don't accept it, they'll go, what? You're saying that dogs don't bite people? They bite people all the time. Dogs are vicious creatures. This is what happens with, the arguments for war. Remember, like going to war with Iraq? All you had to do was say to somebody, what, you don't support our military? Our military is down there right now, so you're against the war. You're against the military. It's an emotional agenda which is designed to manipulate you so that you respond emotionally. You go, no, I love the military. We should go down there and fight. Not go, no, I support the military. I don't support the beliefs behind it. I don't believe that Iraq is a threat to us and all that. That's critical thinking. And then you start getting into the when is something partially true, partially false, sometimes true, sometimes false, 100% true and 100% false. The sun is a hot ball of gas. That is 100% true. There is nothing false in that statement. See what I mean? This is critical thinking. This man does not know what critical thinking is. He is responding to people he sees as being intellectual. And he's right about one thing. What he doesn't realize he's saying, which is true, is that people who are highly intellectual can be very wrong. They can have very reasoned, logical judgments and beliefs, and they could be completely mistaken. Of that, he is right. But what he doesn't understand is what critical thinking is. So, in a nutshell, critical thinking is, number one, you know that you have emotional unconscious attachments, and that anybody coming to you, giving you a belief or a statement or a theory also has emotional unconscious attachments, and that either one or both of us could be skewed by our emotional attachments. And so we want to examine what is being said outside of emotional reactions. I'll give you another example. God doesn't exist. How do you know? Well, because we have no evidence for him. You can't prove him in a laboratory. If God existed, why is there, so much? If God is love, the assumption there that God doesn't exist comes from the assumption that God is the Jehovah of the Bible. This is what they don't realize. That this is why atheists and agnostics are closet monotheists. Actually, they're unconscious monotheists. They unconsciously have accepted the assumption that if there is a God, it is the God of the Bible. And therefore, since the God of the Bible can't exist for all of these billions of reasons, there is no God. It's not an accurate assumption. You can make the assumption that the God of the Bible can't exist without making the determination that there is no God. If there is one, it isn't this one. It isn't the one of the Bible. But the truth is that people have such a strong emotional attachment to the Abrahamic monotheist religion that even if they reject it, they can't open themselves to the possibility of any ethereal being whatsoever, because to do so, to them, it feels on an emotional level like they're accepting Jehovah. And they can't tolerate the thought of Jehovah, so they just reject all spirituality, all entities, all deities. This is a sign of a lack of critical thinking. So here, this gentleman is reacting off of those kinds of people, which is why he brings up faith, which is why he wants to protect people of faith. Because he's right. To just make those blanket statements without quantifying it or understanding it shows a lack of critical thinking, and it shows an unconscious emotional agenda. Okay? All right, so I don't know if there were some other questions I wanted to address. I think there was one. I'm trying to remember it. One of the things is, I told people that I've been banned from YouTube for 90 days, and so many people are actually personally emailing me. And again, please, people, do not personally email me unless you're an apprentice or a client or you're inquiring about some kind of business thing. If you want to give, me some kind of, suggestion about how I can live stream, you can put it on the videos. Please. That's my personal private business email. Anyway, but I'm unable to do that, and I'll tell you why. So for those of you who want to say, well, just make another channel. Well, I can't do, according to this, if I even use another of my channels or create another YouTube channel and I live stream on there, and if YouTube finds out about it, they'll shut down my channel for good. So I can't do that. I'm choosing not to do what I did last time, which was I live streamed on Facebook, and I'm choosing not to do that because it was a lot of work. It took like 4 times the amount of time to do it, and I had to edit it, and then I had to upload it, and it's a huge file and all that kind of stuff. And you might get 5 people, and so it's just not worth it for me. So I'm just gonna continue with the 90 days, and I won't upload. All right. Here's a question. Chris Soto says, "Excuse me, sir, is it true that if the third eye is opened, that they will view life in a boring way, that they'll not be interested in life anymore? I'm looking to work on mine, but I think he went on to say that he wants to stay connected to his family and all those kinds of things. So the third eye, let's just get rid of that. There's no benefit in opening the third eye. The third eye is one of the chakras. All of the chakras will open when you become mature. That's it. Become a mature individual and your chakras will open. Opening the third eye means nothing. What have you gained from that? You can see into other dimensions. How does that help you live life? So what he's talking about is if you open up your third eye, you'll become so spiritual you won't care about. That's nonsense. It's nonsense. Everything, including the chakras, is here to help you live your life. Have relationships, love people, love yourself, enjoy life. Opening the third eye wouldn't do any of that. But you shouldn't waste your time trying to open your third eye, because I can guarantee you 99.99% of the time, no matter what exercise you're doing, you're not opening your third eye anyway. You're probably just tapping into your own unconscious weirdness and you think you're having a vision. So don't even bother with it. That's new age malarkey that says that there's some value in opening your third eye. Your third eye, if it's meant to open, will open when you've reached a level of maturity, and then it won't be any different than anything else. It'll just be another aspect of your life, and you might not even be aware of it. I don't spend any time trying to open my third eye because it does nothing for me to enjoy my life. It's false spirituality. Okay, people giving me advice on how to live stream, which I've already told you I don't need to do that. It's not going to help. Some other things I could, somebody asked here, this is an interesting question. Again, it shows an interesting mind. It shows a curious mind, which I approve of, but do research. And by research, I don't mean watch a bunch of videos. That's not what research is. People say that to me all the time. If they're a flat earther, they're going to say, do your research. And what they mean by that is watch a bunch of videos that I watch. That's just going into an echo chamber and people repeating the same thing over and over again. If it's a false understanding and there's a billion people saying the same false thing, it doesn't make it any more true. It doesn't. So this person, I believe, needs to do more research on things like language and all kinds of other things in order to understand. So he conflates a bunch of different things here, but it's an interesting one. He says, do you think there could be a relation between the followers of Shukra, the Asuras, and Islam? And then he goes on to say, the reason I say this is because the Muslims consider Friday as their holy day. And then what else does he say? We don't need to hear from you. That Muslims consider Friday as their holy day. Mosques have a profound Rahu energy, a powerful Asura. Use the white color extensively in their religious places, which is the color of Venus. So this is what's called, random association, and it means nothing. It's an interesting mind. He's got an interesting, curious mind, but he's making superficial, random associations which have no connection whatsoever. So, could there be a relationship between Shukra, the Asuras, and Islam? Islam is a completely different religion. It's a religion based on Abrahamic mythology, which itself is a bastardization of its own polytheist religion. So I'm going to try to do this as short as possible. All three of the big three that people talk about, which is just the three Abrahamic monotheist religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they are all based on a religion that was created about, I think, 350 BC. I can't remember the exact timing, but I think it's 350 BC in what is now and it was called Israel as well. And what happened is that the Jewish elite, the political elite and the religious elite of Israel. By then, Israel and the other name when the giant, Israel split up into two. I forget the name of the other one. Anyway, so the smaller version of just Israel, they refused to pay taxes. They were a vassal state to the Babylonians. And the Babylonians then came down to punish them. And the way they did that was they took the Jewish elite and the Jewish priests, and they took them into captivity, and they smashed the temple and it put out the flame to Jehovah. At that time, the Jewish people were polytheists, and Jehovah was just simply the protector deity of the state of Israel. But everybody in their home had an altar to all of the gods, the sky father, the earth mother, the goddess of fertility, and they had all of these little, because you can see archaeologically at that time in every home there was an altar to all of the gods and goddesses. So Jehovah was just the protector god, and they had taken that from the Midians and adopted it as their political protector god. And they had this belief that as long as they kept the flame to Jehovah going in the temple, that Jehovah would protect the state of Israel from all invaders. So they decided, we've got the flame, we've got the priests there, we're going to stop paying taxes. And so Babylon said, oh really? And they came down with their armies and they took the elites into captivity, and they flattened the temple and put out the flame. During those 70 years of captivity, the elites were like, what the hell happened? We were doing our rituals to Jehovah and we had the flame lit. How did he abandon us? He's a jealous God. That's when the concept of Jehovah becoming a jealous God came in, because then it turned into, or, if you don't want to give them that much credit, then they go, okay, how can we turn this around so we can hold on to power? Let's make the decision that Jehovah is a jealous God, because as long as all the Israelites are worshiping all of the gods of our ancestors, then they're just like everybody else, and we lose the ability to control people. So let's purge all of those who are politically against us by forcing them to worship the God of the state of Israel, and then anybody who chooses not, we can just kill them and destroy them, and then we'll hold on to power. So what happened is, after the 70 years of captivity, the Jewish elite came back. They came back with this brand new mythology, which had this story of Moses and the children of Israel, which was all completely made up. None of that happened. The Jewish are the descendants of the original polytheist culture, which is slipping my mind, which they came to kill. Moses and Joshua came to kill you know who I'm talking about, the original inhabitants. They're actually the Jewish people are the descendant of the original polytheist culture that had been there for thousands of years. And that's the whole religion. What happened after that is that the Christians, through Rome, hijacked that idea and said, this is a really good way to control the masses. So let's create this savior who is a pacifist and who pays taxes to Rome and who was killed by the Jews, and so then we can sort of make the Jews the bad guy, but their savior the good guy, and we're going to promote the good guy. And it was a great way for them to take monotheism and use it to control an entire empire. Now, what happened after that is that Muhammad, who wanted very much to be part of the Christian and Jewish world, he wanted to be part of the modern world, he decided to create his own religion based on Allah, which was very similar to Jehovah. It was one of the deities of the multiple deities. He took one of them, which was basically the same version, a different pronunciation of El, which was the Jewish king of the gods. And so Muhammad took that and created his own monotheist religion, but his goal was to merge it with Christianity and Islam. His original goal was he wanted to be accepted by the Jews and by the Christians because he loved the Bible, he loved the New Testament, he loved the idea of Mary and Jesus, but he wanted to have his own ethnically diverse or separate one that was sort of attached to it. So he came to the Jews and he said, hey, brothers, because they are very related, they're linguistically and ethnically very closely related, said, hey, I've had this revelation from Jehovah, from Allah, and blah, blah, blah. And the Jews said, no. That's not our religion. Get out of here. They rejected him. He was very hurt by that. He then went to the Christians and he said, hey, I've got this revelation from God the Father. I love Jesus. I love Mary, but I'm a prophet and I want to be part of your thing. And they said, no. You're a blasphemer. Get out of here. His feelings were so hurt that then that's when he started writing about spiritual war, jihad. He started writing about jihad after he was rejected by the Jews and the Christians. All of these religions are all designed to control, which is why if you don't accept the religion, you're killed. You don't see that anywhere else in history. Okay? So the idea that Islam and Shukrakarya are connected is wrong on that level. It's wrong on a linguistic level. There is no connection between the Indo-European Shukra and Allah. There's absolutely no connection whatsoever. So he's conflating all of these things together, which means nothing. The reason why white is associated with Venus is because white represents sexual fluid. It represents semen. It doesn't represent purity, which is what the Muslims are trying to do, because they're trying to purify the world from all other beliefs. So white represents no other belief but that one. So there's no connection there. So again, I'm pointing out to you, people make these conflations. They don't, they haven't researched yet. He's a great guy. I'm sure if he continues to do research with an open mind and understanding critical thinking, he may come to some great conclusions. But right now, he's just superficially throwing things together. And this is why I have this channel, so that I can, do my part. Listen, if I don't know the answer to something, I say I don't know. But anyway, so that's, again, I want to point that out again, connecting to critical thinking. I think that's all. Last one here. Somebody asked me, do you do one-on-one coaching sessions? If you actually click on the link, you'll know that I do. I said yes, and I told him the link where to go and the website. And then he came back and he said, can you do a half hour for $100? And my response to him was, do you want to buy half of a car? Look, I set my time for an hour. It's not an arbitrary time set. I set my time for an hour because I have found, working with clients over the years, that an hour is a really good time. It gives me enough time to ask the right questions, to understand what's happening on your unconscious, to help you understand what it is you really want. It takes at least an hour for me to do that. But the other thing is, if you're coming to me because you think I have some knowledge and some expertise, then part of that is to be a humble student and accept that. He wants to talk for an hour. I'm going to hire him for an hour to talk to him. When somebody comes and they want to barter with me about money and about time, it shows an unconscious resistance to their own learning. And I know you don't understand that. Your conscious thought is, I only have so much money. Maybe he'll give me half of a session. Nope. It's not that I am trying to get a certain amount of money. Listen, if I could do it in a half an hour, I would do it in a half an hour. Half an hour isn't enough time, especially if I don't know you. It takes at least a half an hour for me to understand your unconscious and to work with it and to get in there. And it takes me the second half hour to help you understand what it is you truly want. I have to know what you want first before I can tell you. I'm not telling you what I think you should do. I am helping you find out what you want to do. It takes at least an hour to do that. So 2 things here. Trust me that I know what I'm doing. And 2, trust me that I know what I'm doing, and don't try to come in and gain control, because it's also a way of gaining control. And that's an unconscious resistance to submitting to me and allowing me to teach you. And again, you're not going to learn if you're running the show. This is the respect for a teacher. If you respect a teacher, you ask the teacher, what do I do? He says, I want to talk to you for an hour. You say, okay. And you say how much, and he tells you how much, and you pay him. So I'm going to again say to you, if you value what I say, and you come onto my channel, and you don't invest in something that you want. Now listen, if you come on my channel and you don't want any of the things that I offer, then that's okay with me. I don't have any need for you to need anything or to want to work with me. I don't have any personal agenda one way or another. But if you come onto my channel like many people do, and you keep asking me the same questions over and over and over again, and I keep coming at you with my impatience and my whatever harshness that I come at you with, you owe it to yourself to invest in your awareness. If you're saying to yourself, I don't want to spend the money, or I don't have the money, that tells me that you don't have a complete willingness to invest in yourself. That's like I said to the guy, would you buy half a car? It's a waste of money. I could give that guy a session for a half an hour, and I could charge whatever I decide half price is. He's trying to decide his own price. Again, I know what price I want to charge. If you can't afford it, then save up. He's willing to throw out $100 at me. Well, why don't you save up the rest of it and get a full session? Wait another few weeks. You're impatient, you want it now, but you're not willing to invest. If you don't have the money, get the money. Listen, if it was the latest phone, if it was internet, if it was crack cocaine and you were a crack addict, you would find the money. Why? Because you want it. It tells me you don't want it badly enough. So I am mystified at the amount of people who come onto my channel, leave questions over and over and over, but do not invest in themselves. Save the money, borrow the money, do whatever you got to do to get what it is that you want. And what's the worst that could happen? You subscribe to the Thunder Wizard channel for a month and you decide you don't like it, you're out $50 at the most. 25 if you're at the lower level. So what? That's now you know. If you want to have a session with me, then get the money for the session. If the session is to how to make more money, you're going to get valuable information from me. Get the money, invest in yourself. Stop selling yourself short. Don't buy half of a car. You can't do anything with it. It's worthless and won't take you anywhere. These are here for a reason. Courses.thunderwizard.com has everything that I offer. Take a look at it to see if there's something that you want to invest in yourself for your own knowledge. Neo.thunderwizard.com, the 4 things that you need. You need to know where you're going. You need to know what your soul desire is. 2, you need to have a vehicle to get you there, the life force energy to fuel you. That's the second one. The third one is you need to know the rules of the road. If you know what the 5 rules of mastering the matrix are, and you know how to literally manipulate the matrix to give you the resources to do what you want, you'll be able to get to your destination and live your dreams. And then 4, we need a community. That's what the thunderwizard.com website is about. And again, unless you're an apprentice and you're paying to talk to me one-on-one, which I don't know if there might be some places available, the most you're going to be paying is $50 a month, which is what? If you're drinking one Starbucks coffee and a a croissant a day before you go to work. Just don't do that, and you've saved up, and there's your there's your subscription. So I have no empathy for people who keep telling me they don't have money. When it's something that you want, you find the money pretty fast. So I encourage you to invest in yourself. All right, that's it for me today. I think I got everything out of my system. I will talk to you guys. We'll see. I'm going to go surfing today, and I'll probably be pretty burnt out. So maybe you'll hear from me this weekend, maybe not. All right, talk to you guys soon.